Hi, I'm Ted Wolf, presented by Guidewise. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we connect you to the stories and insights of people who have mastered implementation. Why? Because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Join us as we uncover the secrets of successful implementation so you can conquer your implementation struggles. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, presented by Guidewise, where we focus on the topic of implementation because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Anil Singhal, renowned business co-founder of NETSCOUT, a leadership expert, and an author of the book, The 5% Rule of Leadership. Welcome, Anil.
Thank you, Ted.
Anil, you've wrote a fascinating book, The 5% Rule of Leadership. Could you summarize that 5% rule of leadership and its core message for us?
So I was watching Ted, some of the other interviews they've done. It was interesting to see that it's more, a lot of these, your topics were about ideas to implementation. But what is implementation? It's not just execution. So in this book, I talk about that if leaders can focus on the first 5% of the implementation, which I call the 5% rule, then I think chances of the remaining 95% in the implementation phase. So it's basically the fate of the implementation could be sealed during the first 5%. Just as an example, I mean, it's a very trivial thing we do every day, but we don't necessarily do in the workplace. You are a great driver, meaning you can drive anywhere, you know all the roads in Boston where I live in. But if you don't look at the Google map, which takes less than 5% of the journey, you may not reach on time. Okay, so it's like think before we do. It sounds so simple, but we don't do this. But we every day without thinking we do it. Should I take a train? Should I take a bus? Should I not drive at all at this time? And which is a definition of saying maybe I don't want to implement this project because no matter how hard I work, is really not going to be successful. So this is an ultimate fail fast principle. Okay, usually fail fast means do faster MVP, minimum viable product, first phase, and if it's not going anywhere, just terminate that implementation. Here, actually, before you even start the implementation, like we decide we are not allowed to write the first line of code in engineering until the 5% work is done. And sometimes it may take a little more than 5% effort, and engineers sometimes get very bothered. I'm losing valuable time. And I say, well, you're cutting down the lines of code by thinking more. So you'll have plenty of time. So that's what the 5% rule is. But it has to be front loading with the right leaders. And also, we talk about micromanagement as if it's a leadership trait, which could be true for some place. But I think is also a necessity. If you're not given right direction to your people, then you have to watch everything they're doing. So micromanagement can be avoided or reduced substantially if you properly implement the 5% rule. And that's what this book is about.
And what exactly is that 5%?
Is making the right decision on getting agreement with all the parties who are going to be involved in the implementation, the leaders of those groups, to on the what, why, and how, what and why of the problem. Because if we just know the what, we not only want to do the right thing, but we also want to do it for the same reason. So knowing what problem we are trying to solve before you implement the solution, and then high level view of how we are going to implement. So what of the problem, why of the problem, and how, and sometime before how you may decide actually not to implement.
So what you're saying is basically you do the thinking up front.
Yeah.
You aim and then you fire.
That's it. Otherwise, you'll be doing throughout the implementation the same Google Map example. You'll be taking U-turns, you'll be frustrated, you'll have stress. And so you are actually thinking along as you're driving. Okay. And that will be spread throughout the execution phase. So I'm just dividing that from idea to implementation, in between put the 5% rule.
So the 5% is the first 5% of the total project that you're going to be working
That's right,
on.
roughly. Sometimes it's 2%, sometimes it's 10, but it's roughly that. Just give you one more example, Ted, and it's also with the right leader. So typically, so we have done 10 acquisitions in the company, ranging from $10 million to $2 billion. And in our company, typically your business development guys will say to the CEO, we should be looking into this company. And they start working with the diligence team. And halfway through the diligence, they will come to the CEO for the recommendation whether he should buy this company or not buy this company. At that time, it's very hard for CEO to say no if they are fallen in love with each other. So in our case, I go out for dinner with the other side on day one. I look at there'll be cultural fit. Why are you selling your company? And we have done this throughout, and that has returned 60-70% of the leader in NETSCOUT right now are from acquired companies, VPs. That's not true about other companies. Most of the time people leave. So one of the reasons we buy is we're buying, acquiring talent, not just technology. So this is very important. So I don't want to have my team spend time on diligence if there is no conversation between the two sides, the leadership team on the top. And so that's we are doing that work upfront rather than in the middle. And typically, sometimes people say, "Have you made mistake?" Actually, I made the mistake of on some small acquisition, not following my own rule, and we lost everything. Like there was not big deals, but we lost the people. It turned out to be bad. So about 2 out of 10 went into that direction because it's so small, I didn't follow my own rule.
So let's take a look. You've started NETSCOUT, over 40 years ago, I believe?
Yes.
You have an awful lot of experience, obviously, bringing to the table because today you're doing roughly $800 million in revenue. Give me an example, practical example, that you sat down and you said, this is what's really happening. How did you discover the 5% rule so that you could actually clarify it?
So first thing is that maybe just one more thing. I am first 20 years, I was an incidental leader. And in last 20 years, I think I've become an intentional leader. And so
what's the difference between the two?
Incidental, because I was not planning to be a leader, CEO, going public. We just wanted to do something, consulting, start a project. And so it was not that I was trained to I didn't do the MBA, I was an engineer. And intentional leader is you want to be a CEO, you want to be this. So that's what intentional. So intentional is more prescriptive. But I want to create more intentional leader in NETSCOUT as we go going through the succession planning activity. That's one of the reasons to write this book. So I must have been doing the 5% rule at least in the last 20 years, but I didn't recognize or start calling it the 5% rule until about 10 years ago. Okay. And then for last 5 years, I've been sort of pushing inside our company. So how do I know that I was doing it for 20 years? I found certain projects were very successful and some projects were not successful. And so I realized, hey, what did I do different? And I realized I was doing a lot of those 5% things, which I talk in the book, upfront, doing the right thing. And then I consciously started doing it on every single thing, even on small things, even in before the earnings call, before the board meeting. And now it's become part of life. So, and for unconsciously for 20 years and consciously for 10 years, but not coaching or teaching our leaders to do that formally until up to the last 2 or 3 years.
So would you say the 5% rule then is mostly based around metrics, numbers, or is it more qualitative types of way of interacting with people?
It's also sometimes I think it's often both quality. For example, one of the 5% rule has created consensus and appreciation for things, which has resulted in like our compensation is average, but incentive compensation is very high in NETSCOUT, which is based on success and all those. Yet our retention is highest in our industry. So that's one of the outcome of this, because 5% also not just drives efficiency, but satisfaction that you are understanding why you are being asked to do something. And when you use why, or why a leader wants to solve the problem, you can use all the brains in the company. If you just tell them the what, then they're just doing the work. They don't have a sense of ownership. And so that's a quality. But yes, I mean, we have bought companies which were like bigger competitors who are 10 times our size over a 10-year period. So there have been big success. NETSCOUT stock prices, valuation has gone from, I mean, right now it's actually, we had recent challenges because of many other reasons. And so our valuations has gone from over a period of time from $3 to, valuation from 300 million to peak at $2 billion. Okay. And right now it's in the 1.5 range. Then we have like not a single layoff in 40 years. Okay. And if you look at, I talk about something in the book called lean but not mean. We are implementing, versus the industry lean and mean philosophy. We have been able to say lean but not mean. One of the decisions we make in 5% is don't hire in good times, because you, as a culture, we don't have the luxury to fire in bad times. So actually, the decision to being mean is when you don't have a choice. But the decision which was bad, which was made earlier, was actually in good times. So there are many examples like that. The quality of life in NETSCOUT is very high. If you go to, I mean, we have hundreds of patents. But when people talk about nice place to work, they talk about that why it's like a one happy family. And this has lasted for like 40 years. We have people, first 5 employees of the company are still here from 92.
Very good. Very good. How is the 5% rule different than other leadership models or frameworks?
So I don't know how it is different, but clearly nobody is thinking in this way or with this much passion. And obviously everyone wants to think about before doing, but we are looking at all aspects of implementation before starting the implementation. And I think people have processes, and there's no process involved in the first 5%. Process involved in you look at the agile philosophy, okay? That's a great implementation philosophy. But what are you implementing and how is actually not defined by agile in the software development. So there are a lot of good things, but this is not necessarily in place of, but in addition to, and this is, I think this is a multiplying idea where everything else is additive. So if you do 3 good things versus you multiply something good with 3, and so this is a multiplying force. It's basically provide efficiency, productivity, and I used it even during starting a company. Like we establish a value system, and so just as an example that I talk about in the book, that is transparency the outcome or the goal? Okay, everyone talks about transparency in this world, and I use transparency as the outcome of something else you do, and which is fairness. So, for example, in everyone in NETSCOUT is a stock owner. Okay, they obviously get different level of stocks, but everyone is eligible for stock based on performance. 100% of the employees. Because of that reason, I can talk about the virtues of stock in NETSCOUT, owning stock in NETSCOUT, part of our variable compensation, profit sharing to the entire company transparently. And it's very simple also, because I can do one presentation on a conference call. So look at we are focused on transparency and simplicity, but actually is driven by fairness.
Mhm.
Also having one classes of stock. And when you have co-founder, we have bought 10 companies and we found 90% of the money, 95% goes to the founders or investors who are there. In NETSCOUT, all classes are of the same, all stocks are of the same class from day one. So there is a value system design at the start of the company. In addition to this, is not in place of other things you do, like you need a business plan, you have to raise fund, you have to define product. Yeah, industry is doing so. You ask for a how is it different? Those we are doing all of that, but this portion is not, it's an afterthought. And here we said this is part of the first 5%. Before you even start coming up with business plan, you should decide who you want to be. Do you want to even be an independent company? You not don't always have the choice. But luckily, we are able to stay as an independent company for so long.
Walk me through the different steps of the methodology, if you will, of the 5% rule. How would I have to make a decision. I need stronger revenue penetration. I need to really get everything moving better relative to revenue generation in the sales area. Walk me through, how do I use the 5% rule?
So during that time, we will say what is plaguing our growth in the first place, okay? And assuming a company like us is all incremental, okay? Suppose our revenue is declining. The first we have to see is why it is declining before we even talk about growth, okay? Because we could drive growth in area A, but we are making a hole in the original one in B. Also, we have the coach of New England Patriot here, Bill Belichick, was one of our sales meetings. He told us, when a new season starts, you are 0-0, even if you are the Super Bowl champion in the previous year. So I look at to say that when you have to drive growth, you are not going from 800 to 900 million. You are going from 0 to 900. So all this is discussed, that you don't do anything which is going to be, a lot of time we focus on pros or only on the cons, and then we become risk averse. How can you look at the pros and cons of the same decision? Second thing is, just because somebody else is successful in driving growth in some segment doesn't mean you'll be able to do it. You have to look at your skill set. So what I find in when we discuss, and we have a lot of ups and downs, when we discuss this, different teams will have different ideas to drive growth. And they all have the same goal. But you can't do all of those things. And so you have to sit down during the 5%. Which one of these 5 ideas? Also, I'm a firm believer that you double down on 1 or 2 good things rather than try 5 things, and hopefully 2 of them will work, because it dilutes. So how do you decide which one of those 2 of those 5 things you are going to bet on? All this is done before any execution energy is invested. So that's what we do in the 5%. And when we get out of the room, everyone is united. Okay, we agree, for even though we didn't like it, this is what we are going to do. And also, do not do list is always bigger than the to do list. And people don't pay attention to do not list. They usually are right about to do things, but not to do things are actually even more important, because they dilute the energy on the to-do list. So how do you decide your not to-do list is done in terms of growth. And you would say, like when you're driving growth, you'll always say what to do, but you may also decide what not to do. Also, do you want to drive margin? The growth is a driver of stock price or valuation or something else, or is just growth for the sake of doing growth? If it is for valuation, maybe we need to drive profitably rather than top line growth. So all these things, depending on the phase of the company, I mean, we have done this decision. We used to ship hardware, software together, and our margins were low, and we were able to drive a lot of profitability by segregating hardware from software. And it started with a growth meeting. but actually ended up with the profitability meeting. So imagine this happening once you started in the execution. So the key thing which you are doing, Ted, is we are making practically all the decision before starting the execution. And in the very first 5%, yes, there are some minor turns, but there are no U-turns. And that's, you can see the success of the Google Map and all those. I mean, chances of you reaching on time with less frustration or no frustration is almost 90-95%. And sometimes you decide not to do certain things. And I tell people, I don't mind being wrong 10% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the power of that 5%. I know it's a little bit tricky and a subjective idea. And Pareto is another thing which we talk about. The Pareto principle says 20% of the revenue come from 80%, 80% revenue come from the 20% of the salespeople, as I mentioned earlier. So this 5% time is like a Pareto. A Pareto is the 20% of the 20%, and roughly 4-5%. And this is, we find that this is a easier way or faster way or more happier way to succeed. Mm-hmm. There are other techniques, but this has worked well, and I think this has added a new dimension to NETSCOUT success.
Okay. So I'm going to generally go through these step by step, and you tell me if I'm on base or off base.
Okay.
So we have a good definition of the list for the listeners. I come up with an opportunity. There's something I need to change in the business, and that is I want to improve my sales. Mm-hmm. So I look at what the obstacles are, but I also look at what the opportunities are. And then I look for the catalysts, and I'm going to use the old data processing framework, input, process, output. I'm looking for the input. What do I need to accomplish that opportunity? But at the same time, I'm going to make a do not list so that I do not fall into the obstacles continuously. But I think those through before I act. That's part of my governing, if you will, of a project or management of a project. So then I identify maybe the top 2 or 3 things, good opportunities that we feel very certain about that we can implement, we can get working, and we test prove in some manner in the planning stage, how can these inputs get us to our opportunity? And I create the do not list. And then I put my resource associated with it, the financials, the metrics, the type of people. Do I have the people? I do all that resource planning in there. And then before I start working, I vet it. I make sure everybody's on board. Are we missing anything? Are we looking at what we need to do? And I do that absolute planning up front in detail. And that would include people, process, finance, metrics, the emotional impact that it's going to have on individuals and how we keep them motivated. And I go through that thoroughly, and then I make the decision, go or no go. And once it goes, it gets turned over to my people. I'm not coming in 5 months from now trying to make it work. Yeah. I'm getting continuous feedback from them. But that 5% is doing all the forefront thinking. It's not, if I can use an analogy, correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm going to program and I'm going to code, I need to know the outcome. And I lay out how many screens I'm going to have, et cetera, et cetera. And I do all that analysis before I pick up the coding effort versus go code and then recode and fix the bug and things like that. Am I accurate?
Yeah, so there is with one change, obviously we have to do, I think there are design elements in this, what you talked about, because if you have to do all the resource planning and make sure everything will be perfect in implementation, then it will take more than 5%. So actually making the decision, you are with me until the point that this is an opportunity. Now, why won't you go over the opportunity? We don't have the skill set in the company. We don't have a customer base to sell to. So you have to make that. Those are the decisions we'll finish at 5%. We don't do resource planning in the 5%. That's part of the implementation. And the people who are in the meeting, they know that they will not take an opportunity which will not have a resource backing. Okay, that's one of the reasons we'll pick up the opportunity. So I think there is going to be a toned down version of what you said. And So if we can, maybe there is a 3-step. I mean, in that implementation, there is a design, which is resource planning and all those, which is in your, so there is idea, and that's in your case is implementation is design and execution. Resource planning and some of the things you talked about will there. But making a decision that I have to go after this opportunity, why I'll be successful, that's where we stop the 5%.
Very good. I understand. Thank you. Now, does the 5% rule apply to leadership skills and capabilities and competencies? If so, could you explain that for us?
So in order to successfully implement the 5% rule, you need a skill set, which I talk in the second set of chapters, like problem solving skill. Clearly articulating the problem without getting into the solution. Also, there could be there are 5 levels of people in that meaning, and you have to use a language where everyone can participate, because the engineer can bog you down with so much detail about the opportunity and think nobody else can participate. Okay. Then driving consensus. Oftentimes, I find people are arguing with each other in the meeting whose solution is better. But then we say, what problem you are trying to solve? The opportunity and growth is a very high level definition of the problem. When you go down, you find they're trying to solve different problems. So a leader who is what I call the sponsor of the 5% meeting will make sure we drive consensus, we balance pros and cons, and we had meetings where one leader was totally against an idea or to drive growth, and other one was gung-ho about it. And then we found out one person was worried about distractions and cons and risk, and other person was talking about the benefit. And so if they were in the same brain, they will be able to say how to balance my pros and cons. And so there is a skill set on how do we do this quickly, because you don't want to spend more than roughly 5% of the time. So having the right people in the room, somebody driving the consensus, and over time you learn those skills, which is like 6 or 7 thing I have. What problem you are trying to solve, reduce the number of things, options you have, double down on uh, things you are going to do, and keep a list of things you will not do, explain the reason. You not only have to do the right thing, but you have to do it for the same reason. Otherwise, implementation will differ. So those are there are about 7 or 8 things I talked about in the book, which is and also that penny wise pound foolish sometime in terms of like what is important. Okay. And also when you make a list of things, you always don't put at the same level of priority. There should be 1, 2, 3, 4 rather than 4 things we are going to do. First of all, reduce the number of things you are using it to sell. And I use a word called make the sale in selling. There is open the door, you get a customer to hear your story. And then we go to POC in the implementation phase. We establish something called a proof of value. We're saying, what are we going to show you and why that is important? And that sort of creates a letter of intent with the customer. They're not saying we are going to buy it, but most likely they'll buy it if we show them the value. Now the proof of concept becomes a proof of our concept, which we have already sold to the customer. And the POC or POV is just a proving what you already sold. So that is 5% also. That in the 5% we establish before we do the proof of concept with the customer.
So in your methodology, where is the place of emotional intelligence in figuring and calculating the 5%?
Meaning, how do you decide on the
how do you value the emotional impact of the decisions you're going to make, the disruption that you might be causing? How will that emotionally impact the employees that you have working within the organization? You obviously haven't done an awful lot of things because fairness is central to what you're doing. Everybody has stock options. So you're certainly taking them into consideration. but what is the place of emotional intelligence?
Well,
So
I
people
think
can.
so. What I find in the book, I talk about a different aspect, that all the disconnects in the organization are reflection of disconnects at the top. Okay, if a VP of marketing or VP of sales and VP of finance don't agree, you'll see impact of those disconnects down the organization. But really came so if those three people in the 5% meeting, when they come out of that, there is a consensus that company has decided that this is the right thing to do. Otherwise, 5% route is not completed. And as a result, the emotional stuff is dealt by them, because they're telling why we should do it to their organization, why should we collaborate and all those. And then I think other big part is explaining the why of a decision to every single person who is implementing is actually very, very important, because they may not agree. They may not agree with the decision, but if they understand the why, they know why you made that decision.
And that would guide you in your book. In chapter 5, you talk about the hierarchy of purpose.
That's
Could you
right.
talk
Yeah.
to us a little bit about that?
I think we are, so as a leader, depending on the phase of the life of the company, I mean, because we are number one in our space. So we feel that we also have responsibility for the market. So it's not just about growth, it's the growth of our market segment. And that's why we use a slogan, Guardians of the Connected World. Everything is not about making money. And I used a thing called Visibility Without Border as the theme. And it came from Doctors Without Borders. And explaining to people how it's related to Doctors Without Border is that doctors treat all the patients in the world, regardless of color, of the skin, and how poor, rich they are, what language they speak, where they live, and all that. But really, one of the reasons they are able to use that skill is because all the people in the world have the same blood groups. They have similar illnesses. Well, all networks have similar illnesses. They have the performance problem. They have the security problem. They could be cloud. It could be on-prem. It could be service provider network, phone network, cable network. And so we have devised a technique which we call visibility without border, which can provide this same functionality, and that's very helpful to our customer as they are managing the digital transformation. So we use this as the central also theme to say we cannot deviate from that purpose of developing our market segment while we are growing our business, and we can't deviate from lean but not mean principle for our company, good times or bad times. And this was really tested at some of our people may have been here long time, but what we did during COVID was a non-event at NETSCOUT. How we took care of everything, and even our cafeteria staff and everything. So that actually created a newfound appreciation for lean but not mean. So sometimes some of the good ideas and principles get tested in tough times. Also, as we are going through our reinvention of NETSCOUT, it's very important that our key people believe that we'll be able to transition out of this. Okay. And so last thing you have to worry about it is managing the expectation of people when you are trying to managing the expectation of the investors, or try to reinvent yourself. And we have like every 10 years or so, we had to reinvent ourselves.
And one of the things you mentioned previously was that a lot of your growth is coming from acquisitions right now. And that's a skill set in and of itself. So let's talk a little bit about that. Should we have some listeners that are thinking about acquisitions, being acquired or acquiring? In your book, you mentioned you need to front load negotiations before you go in. Could you help us understand that?
So, for example, that I use employees or talent is our intellectual property. So we are not buying technology. We are buying talent also in there. So when we do the front loading negotiation, which is just me and one person from our side and the key people, if it is a private company, is the founder, otherwise the CEO or whatever. And we talk about things like, is there a cultural fit? What is important to you? And why would you stay at NETSCOUT after the acquisition? Okay. And why you're selling your company? Okay. Also, what is important to your customer base? Yeah, we talk about some technology things also. And so these are the kind, and then also, by the way, very interesting. I ask people, how much you want for your company? Believe it, dinner time. And this discussion is at dinner time, where we get different kind of vibes flowing in. You get to know each other. And I ask the question, how much you think you want to vote for your company? And it's very difficult answer for people to give because they don't want to go too low or too high. Okay. But they have to say, if they don't do it, then we get to decide so the ballpark range of the acquisition, the two bookends are actually negotiated, not negotiated, but sort of agreed on, and it goes in the letter of intent. So our letter of intent usually takes longer than other people. Other people do letter of intent just to start the discussion because they have to sign a non-disclosure and they have to say something. But the lot of stuff in terms of how this will fall out is actually not in the letter of intent. And so letter of intent is where the first 5% ends. Whereas letter of intent is not for that purpose in other acquisition. So basically this is front loading because if any of these criterias are not qualified, we don't go with that. That means nobody in NETSCOUT is involved until they go no-go decision. And a lot of them are no-go decisions because we feel that there won't be a good cultural fit. Also, like we had a company in New Zealand and we decided that's just too far. Okay. And so these are the kinds of things which usually done way deep into the diligence process.
And if you could explain the final 5% of making the deal?
So the final, you mean I may have mentioned this in the book, but final 5% is really, that's where I'm using my title, not my skill. In the first 5%, I'm using my skill. That's the final price negotiation, compliance, the bankers, and all those things. So final 5% is not that important. So there is 5%, there is whole diligence, which is 95%. And then there is operationalization of the deal in the end, meaning like looking at HR records, looking at all the compensation, looking at the benefits of the two companies, harmonizing them. Those are like there you have to authorize, but I'm really not doing the work. But board get involved. Okay, we have to look at press releases and all those. So there is final 5%. I mean, after thinking about when I wrote, I said that's confusing people, and that's not really. That probably every company is doing well. The first 5% is the real 5%.
And why do you think earnouts are bad for acquisitions?
Yeah. So as I mentioned in the book, so since our goal is to integrate the other company into us, if they have an earnout, their goal is to increase their portion of the revenue. Our goal is to increase the total revenue. And now there is alienation of the two teams. So we don't believe in earnout. We say earnout is also artificially inflating the price. Well, if you don't trust the people, why are you buying them? So I feel that earnout is really, there are so many places we have bought companies which were acquired by other companies before, and there is so much alienation, ill will. There are people even suing each other because somebody said, no, we met our objective. But the main goal is the total revenue of the company is the goal for every single company. By doing earnout, you created company within a company with different goals.
Mm-hmm. So when you're talking to an organization, you mentioned in here, be a problem solver, not a solution provider. Give them what they need, not what they ask for.
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that?
So this happens with customers also. Sometimes will say, I want you to implement this feature. Okay. And that's like what they ask for. We go and say, why are you asking for this feature? And that once there was a feature which would require 6 months and we did it in 1 week. How did that happen? Once we understood customer's problem, we were able to show a different way of using the feature which are already in the product.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But you had not asked the question, we would have unnecessarily implemented that feature. So the way we want to solve customers' problem, not build a solution, because we are the expert in, they know what the problem they're facing. But we should be free to provide the, as long as we solve that problem, they should not care how we solve that problem. But sometimes it's very hard for them to articulate the problem. And most of the time it's not for confidential reason, unless it's NSA or something. But we don't ask the question. And because if we want to provide the most efficient solution, and sometimes we are able to do bigger features than what they ask for, but still spend the same amount of time. And plus, we also look at when we do this, like how custom is for that one customer, and how we can do it in a way we can sell it to other people.
Mm-hmm. So when you make the acquisition, culture probably is one of the bigger determinants. Is this going to work or isn't it? Because if the cultural doesn't fit between two organizations, you constantly have an uphill battle. But let's say that you have an organization, whether you want to implement the 5% rule in your company or you're making an acquisition and bringing one in. How do you implement the 5% rule throughout the entire organization?
I think that's a challenge because, first of all, I'm using 5% at the leadership level. So I would say 5% of the company's leaders, directors and above.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you need to feel them passionate about it. And that's what we are trying to do with this book. I mean, clearly all the leaders in NETSCOUT are not doing it, not because they don't want to do it. And so they need to feel ownership is good for their career, is good for the company, is good for their people who report. That's how we get it done. And we are not there in NETSCOUT there. And that's one of the things. Before I retire, I want to make sure next generation leaders embrace this, and not only embrace it, but are able to implement it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can do that, and this book serves that. As we speak, there are lots of 5% meetings going on throughout the company right now since this book has come out.
Mm-hmm.
And we have about each department has 5-6 topics. Okay. Not every things which you have done before, you're not going to do 5% again. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So repeatable things which are not complex, you don't do that. Or you do it at a lower level. And there are things at my level we are doing. And there are about 50 or so topics which we're going to cover. Some will take just one meeting of 2 hours, and some may take 3 or 4 meetings, but no meeting is going to take, no topic will take more than 4 or 5 meetings in a span of 1 month.
Mm-hmm. So what do you see the biggest obstacle being to implementing the 5% rule in the organization?
I think the real appreciation, because people will just do it because I'm saying, but that's not going to really do it. And I think they're feeling that it has real benefit. I think it's still a abstract concept even in NETSCOUT. And some people might, let's say I'm able to do a lot of things successfully. They may give a lot of credit to my experience and title, but not to what the 5% technique I'm using.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a challenge sometimes I face, because they don't have my title, they don't have my experience. So they'll say, well, that's why I cannot do it. But it's really they're not adopting this technique. And frankly, we have not pushed for it. I have not pushed for it until recently, that this is the best way of implementing various things. And so, I mean, that's my dream, that in next 2-3 years, every aspect of NETSCOUT, with or without me, will be sort of driving all the decision making and pre-implementation things through the 5% rule.
So would I'd be correct to say that your biggest obstacle to get it implemented is getting people to change how they make decisions, how they evaluate things, how they plan, how they execute, etc. May involve change on their part. So that would probably be the biggest challenge that you have to deal
That's
with.
right. Yeah. So not jump into execution prematurely.
Mhm.
And there's always a fear that if I don't jump in, I will not finish the project in time.
Mhm.
And so they feel that we would talk too much about it. That's why the 5% decision making has to be very efficient, because it takes 50% of the time, then it's going to backfire.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you have to be really disciplined about how you do this and what topics belong there, not overwhelm yourself. And I can see we are dealing with some of those challenges. I think the biggest thing is that what is the benefit of change? If people get that, then they'll do the change. If they see the change, the benefit, then I think it'll be much easier for them to be passionate about, because we have proven that 5% rule actually cuts down the lines of code. And if you
Mhm.
do that, SQL time will be less. Okay. Sales cycle will be shorter. What could be better than that for a salesman or engineer?
Okay, so you're getting ready to retire in the future. What does that future look like for you, Anil?
I think I may be like retiring from CEO and retiring from NetScout could be two different things. I may work forever. I don't know what I'll do. And so I'm really board and other it's important for them for succession planning and but we are grooming people at all levels. I mean, a lot of our management team is over 60. Okay. And we think we can uh, do all succession planning from the people, 90% from within the company, promotion from within the company. So
Very
this
good.
5% is also mentoring them. In fact, this is a test that people who are able to do successfully 5%, they become candidate.
Very
And
good.
so I have created a group of people which I was mentoring, and there were some interesting insights into who will be able to do that. And so we are not looking from succession planning. We are looking mostly people from inside.
Okay.
And we have candidates. They are not ready for that. And in the book, I even talk about a actually interesting chapter on which came inspired by the movie Intern from Robert De Niro, which is called a Golden Intern program, where the previous leader stays for 2 more years. And we have implemented that now at the executive level,
Okay.
just now with a couple of people looking into that. And that gives a time. And so I might become an intern forever and more like a coach rather than a leader driving the company.
Well, you have a remarkable track record of accomplishment in 40 plus years. My congratulations to you. It is
Yep.
a lifelong endeavor, and it's something obviously you've been passionate about. You've thought a lot about. Thank you for documenting it and codifying it, if you will, into the book. Anil, if somebody wants to talk to you, what's the best way to contact you?
So, I mean, I reluctantly agreed to be on LinkedIn after this book. I didn't even have a LinkedIn account. So, like I said, I'm not a big social media person.
Mm-hmm.
So they can contact me on LinkedIn. And my email is anil@netscout.com.
Very
And
good.
there are people watching that. So I think so those will be the ways uh, people can contact me or anyone in the company.
Okay, very good. Anil, thank you very much for your time today. It was a very interesting conversation. I highly recommend the book, The 5% Rule of Leadership, Using Lean Decision Making to Drive Trust, Ownership, and Team Productivity. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dad.
Hi, Ted Wolf here. I want to thank you for joining us for this Implementors video. The Implementors podcast is presented by Guidewise, where we, along with our vetted member community, recognize that ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. To learn more about getting things done with Guidewise, please visit us at guidewise.io. And to conquer your implementation struggles, please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. Happy implementing.